Today, we're going to interview Representative Mary Gonzalez about one of her bills that has to do with the state's accountability system. But first, an introduction. Representative Mary Gonzalez has served a House district near El Paso since 2013, and she's now in her 5th term. She's been appointed to be Vice Chair of the House Appropriations Committee, which is a very important posting, Chair of the subcommittee covering general government and criminal justice, and she's also a member of the House Public Education Committee. She's been a strong advocate for her district, Hispanic and LGBT causes, for which she has received several awards. Representative Gonzalez, thank you so much for doing this interview with Indivisible txlege. We want to support the bill you've authored, as well as make sure that it gets a hearing about reforming the state's public education accountability system. The bill is House Bill 1867. Now, to encourage public support, we have some questions that we'd like to ask you. First of all, please tell us why you have introduced the bill.
Thank you, Robert, and I really appreciate y'all inviting me to speak today. You are doing so much good work to educate the public about what's happening here at the Capitol. So let me tell you a little bit about House Bill 1867. Where did the idea come from? Last session, we saw transformative public education reform when it came to school finance. What started that reform? It started from the Commission on School Finance. That process has shown to be successful. In this moment in time, we see bipartisan support for wanting to have transformational reform to accountability and assessment. We know it's not working the way it needs to work. We know it has harms to local communities, students and teachers, and we know we're overpaying for the system that isn't working. So why don't we create the process for transformational change in the same way that we did for school finance?
Would you please tell us what the bill would actually do?
Thank you, Robert. So the bill would create a commission that would, over the interim, investigate and look at the accountability and assessment system and come up with recommendations. Here's why this bill is important. On the commission are actual legislators who will then file the legislation to move the recommendations forward. In the past, we've had blue ribbon commissions, but without the legislators at the table, there is no guarantee that the legislation will be passed and shepherded through the process.
One more question about that, and feel free to add anything in that I may not have asked you about, but could you mention for a minute why it is public schools should be the focus of this kind of legislation about accountability, and maybe, talk about how the accountability system affects real students?
The accountability and assessment system we have in Texas, it has a purpose. So I'll give an example. I live in El Paso. I live in one of the top 10 poorest districts in the state of Texas. And we need to know how our schools are doing. Here's the problem. The system we have right now isn't actually measuring how our students are doing and isn't really providing the data that we need for racial justice, social justice, and equity. So we need something different. We need something that doesn't traumatize, dehumanize our students and teachers, which is what's happening right now. We need a system that actually measures in healthy and effective ways, and then measures what we know kids really need to know. I'll give an example. The way we are doing writing testing right now through STAR isn't the way that students need to actually write in their future careers and in college. And so we really need to be rethinking, what do we want them to learn, and how do we measure that in a way that doesn't create harm and trauma and gives us accurate data, so we can have a system that elevates and uplifts students as opposed to dehumanizes and breaks them down. I should also mention we're spending lots of money on the system without having, lots of millions of dollars on this system that isn't working. And if we're going to spend that much money, then we need to have the accurate data.
This is a really important bill, and like I said, we want to make sure that it actually gets a hearing. So what do you think the public could do to make sure that this bill gets a hearing?
This is my favorite question. Because of COVID-19, across the legislature, we see less bills getting hearings, and we see, and we're really behind in the process. So we need to make sure that we are moving this bill forward. As of right now, it hasn't had a hearing. What can the public do? One is communicate with the chairman that this is a really important bill to the public and it should have a hearing. I'm sure that y'all can put in a Facebook message where to call the clerk or the chairman's office. The other thing you can do is call the speaker's office and their education person and tell them this is a really important bill, so the leadership also feels invested in this piece of legislation. The second is, once the bill gets a hearing, is to continue to demonstrate the support. It's because we'll need to be able to move it through the process quickly. We are already over halfway through legislative session. If we don't pass this bill this session, it'll be another 2 years before we can address this really important conversation. We need to act with a sense of urgency in this moment because we're running out of time.
Representative Gonzalez, thank you so much for this interview. We think this is an important bill, and we'll do what we can to put out a call to action so that this bill gets a hearing.